Savannah Hale stood on the porch of Hale Ranch with a rifle resting easily in her arms, the way another woman might hold a basket of eggs. Behind her, the house was quiet, the way it had been quiet for 2 years, ever since her father's chair by the fireplace went empty. In front of her, a man in a fine grey coat was climbing back onto his horse, his face red with anger. He was trying hard to hide. "You will lose this land, Miss Hale," he said. "Better to sell it to me now, while I am still being kind about the offer." "You have never been kind a day in your life, Mr. Reeve," Savannah answered, and she did not lower the rifle until his horse had turned fully toward the road. He rode off down the dirt path, dust rising behind him like smoke from a fire that had already burned everything it could burn. Savannah watched him go until he was small on the horizon, then let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Her arms ached from holding the rifle steady, but she would not have set it down a second sooner. Not for a man like Reeve. Not for any man who thought a ring could do the work that hard labor and honest debt repayment were supposed to do. This was the 4th man that season, 4th man who wanted her father's ranch more than he wanted her, and dressed the wanting up as courtship, as concern, as kindness. She was tired of saying no. She was more tired of the reason she kept having to say it. A ranch drowning in debt, a well running dry, a herd growing thinner by the week, and a town that whispered, low and cruel behind cupped hands, that she would lose everything before the year was out. She walked back inside, set the rifle in its place by the door, and stood a long moment looking at the empty kitchen. Her father's hat still hung on its peg by the window. She had never been able to bring herself to move it. She did not know yet that the answer to her problem was already walking toward her, 3 days down the road, dressed like a man with nothing, carrying the one thing she needed most, and had stopped believing she would ever find again, the truth. The drought had not been kind to the valley that year. Grass that should have stood tall and green by June was thin and yellow, bending flat under a wind that carried no rain in it, only dust, and the smell of a summer that refused to break. The creek that fed Hale Ranch had shrunk to a narrow line of water, winding through cracked earth, and each morning Savannah walked its bank and measured, with her eyes alone, how much farther it had pulled back overnight. Her father had built this ranch with his own 2 hands, 30 years before, back when the valley was still mostly open range, and a man's word was worth more than any paper a bank could print. Savannah remembered riding beside him as a girl, watching him teach the hands how to read a storm before it broke, how to gentle a spooked horse, how to look a hard year in the eye, and keep working anyway. When he died 2 winters back, sudden and quiet in his sleep, he left her the ranch, his cattle, his debts, and his stubborn, old-fashioned belief that a Hale never sold what a Hale had built, no matter how heavy the building had become to carry alone. Savannah kept that belief alive, the only way she knew how, by refusing every man who came to buy her out through marriage instead of money. There had been Reeve, with his grey coats and his sharp, practiced words, a man who had inherited 3 ranches already, and wanted a 4th without spending a cent more than a wedding band required. There had been Coleman, who brought flowers one week, and a lawyer with a marriage contract the next, as though love could be filed alongside a deed. There had been others whose names she had already let herself forget, each one folding into the last until they became a single tiresome shape at her gate. Hungry eyes, soft hands, and a voice that called her situation an opportunity instead of a grief. Each one wanted the same 3 things: her land, her cattle, and a wife quiet enough not to ask questions about either. She was not built to be quiet. Her father had not raised her to be quiet, not when a fence needed mending, or a hand needed correcting, or a wrong name needed out loud in front of the whole town, if that was what it took. But quiet was not the same as unafraid, and lately, alone in the dark after the house had settled and the last lamp had gone out, Savannah let herself feel the fear she never allowed anyone to see in daylight. Inside the house that evening, She sat at the kitchen table, where the ranch's ledger lay open, its numbers red and getting redder with every season that refused to turn kind. She rubbed her eyes and thought about her father's voice, low and steady. The way he used to say that a ranch was not dirt and fences. It was a promise a person kept to the people who came before them and the people who would come after. She was trying to keep that promise with an account book that had almost nothing left in it. And some nights, the weight of the trying felt heavier than the promise itself. Cade, her foreman, found her there past midnight. The lamp burned low. He had worked for her father since before Savannah was old enough to ride alone, and she trusted him the way a person trusts the ground beneath their boots, without thinking to ask whether the ground had ever shifted. "You should sleep," Cade said. "Numbers don't get kinder the longer you stare at them." "Someone has to look at them," Savannah said. "Might as well be me. You turned Reeve down again this morning. The whole town's going to hear about it by supper." "Let them hear." Cade rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he had when he was working up to saying something he thought she would not want to hear. "Banks called the notes due in 6 weeks, Savannah. Auction's already being talked about down at the saloon, whether you want to hear that or not. Then I have 6 weeks to find another way." "Pride's a fine thing," Cade said, echoing words he had said to her more than once that year. "But it doesn't pay debts." She did not answer, because she did not have an answer that did not sound exactly like the stubbornness he was warning her against. He left her alone with the ledger and the lamp, and for a long while Savannah simply sat, listening to the wind move through the dry grass outside, wondering how many more mornings she would wake up and find the numbers had not changed, and how many more strangers would ride up her road with offers dressed as kindness and meant as theft. 3 days later, everything changed, though it did not announce itself with any noise at all. A stranger walked up the long road to Hale Ranch on foot, boots covered in dust, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. No horse, no fine coat, no lawyer trailing behind him with papers already drawn up. He stopped at the gate, took off his hat, and waited to be noticed, patient as a man who had learned, somewhere hard, that patience was worth more than pushing. His name was Bo. He said only that he needed work, and that he had hands strong enough to earn his keep. He did not mention marriage. He did not mention her father's debt, or the auction everyone in town was already circling like buzzards over a dying animal. He asked for a job the plain way any honest man might ask, and something about the stillness in him made Savannah look at him twice, then a third time, before she trusted herself to speak. She had learned to read men quickly, and the ranch had forced that skill on her the hard way. Reeve's eyes had always gone straight to her land before they ever settled on her face. Coleman's smile had never once reached his eyes, not even in his most convincing moments. But Bo looked at her the way her father used to look at a storm building in the west, careful, respectful, and not afraid, the look of a man sizing up a challenge rather than an opportunity. She almost turned him away. She had no money to spare for a hired hand she did not need, and a stranger on a struggling ranch was one more risk in a life already balanced on too many risks. But the barn roof needed fixing before winter, and her last 2 ranch hands had quit the month before, tired of wages that came late, or did not come at all. Pride only allowed her one honest answer. "I can't pay you much, and I can't promise it'll be steady. Take it or leave it." "I'll take it," Bo said, and that was the whole conversation, plain and unremarkable. The kind of exchange that should not have mattered, and somehow mattered more than any of the long, flattering speeches Reeve or Coleman had ever given her. She did not know that the man standing at her gate carried papers in his canvas bag that could save her ranch entirely, or that his real name was tied to a debt her father owed, long before she was ever born. She did not know that the same storm building against her, the land developer circling town, the corrupt officials signing off on papers no honest man should ever sign, had already touched Bo's life once before, years ago, and left him with a reason to come back and finish what his own family had started. All she knew, standing there in the dust with the sun sinking gold behind the ridge, was that he did not smell like ambition, the way every other man who had come to her gate did. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough to let him in. Before Beau ever came to Hale Ranch, there was Reeve, and the morning he rode up the path in his grey coat, Savannah already knew what he wanted before he opened his mouth. She had known it the first time he called on her, and every time since, and she wondered sometimes why he kept riding out here at all, when her answer never once changed. She was in the garden when she heard his horse, kneeling among her mother's roses with a pair of shears in hand, cutting back the dead growth so the healthy stems could breathe. She set the shears down and wiped the dirt from her hands, taking her time about it, because a man like Reeve needed to learn, again and again if necessary, that she would not run to greet him. "Miss Hale," he said, tipping his hat as he swung down from his horse. "You look well, despite everything." "Despite what, exactly?" Savannah asked, rising slowly and brushing the last of the soil from her skirt. "The drought, the debt, the talk in town." He said each word lightly, as though listing pleasant weather instead of the ruin of her family's life work. "I hear the bank is losing patience with you." "The bank's patience is the bank's business, Mr. Reeve, not yours. It could be mine, if you'd let it." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the expensive oil in his hair, and Savannah held her ground, though every part of her wanted to step back. "Marry me, and all of it disappears. The debt, the drought, the worry over every dry well and every thin cow. You would want for nothing, Miss Hale. I would see to that personally. You would see that owning my father's land is what you would see to." His jaw tightened, just slightly, enough to tell her she had struck true, the way she always struck true when she stopped playing along with his pretty language. "You cannot save this ranch alone. Every rancher in this valley knows it. The only question is, which of us gets to help you before the bank takes it from you and sells it to a stranger who never even knew your father's name? I have saved it alone for 2 years, Savannah said, keeping her voice level, though her heart pounded harder than she liked. I will save it a third, and a fourth, and however many more it takes. Pride is a poor substitute for a full account book. Pride is the only thing keeping this ranch in Hale hands, and I intend to keep it that way." He studied her for a long moment, something calculating behind his eyes, the look of a man reconsidering his strategy rather than his goal. "You will change your mind eventually. They always do, once the numbers get bad enough. Then you may come back once I have, Mr. Reeve, and not one day before." He left angry, the same way he always left, his horse kicking up dust down the long road until he was nothing but a small dark shape against the pale dry hills. Savannah stood in the garden a long while after he had gone, staring at the roses her mother had planted before she passed, the one soft, deliberate thing left on a ranch that circumstance had turned hard and practical, whether she liked it or not. She touched a yellow petal, cool and soft against her rough, work-worn fingers, and thought about how her father used to say that a Hale woman did not bend just because the wind blew hard against her. She wished, sometimes, in the private hours when no one could see her wishing, that being strong did not have to mean being so entirely alone. That evening, Cade found her at the kitchen table, with the ledger open in front of her, the numbers no kinder than they had been that morning, red ink bleeding across nearly every column that mattered. "You turned down Reeve again," Cade said. It was not a question, more an observation, delivered with the tired patience of a man who had watched this same scene play out too many times to count. "I turn down every man who wants the ranch more than he wants me," Savannah said, not looking up. "Might be, there's no difference left between the two kinds of men in this town, Miss Hale. Maybe you're waiting on something that doesn't exist." Savannah looked up at him then, surprised by the weariness in his voice. "There's a difference, Cade. I just haven't met the man who proves it yet. The bank's calling the loan due in 6 weeks, he reminded her, as though she could have forgotten. Auctions already being talked about at the saloon. Half the county's placing bets on who will end up owning this land by autumn. Let them talk. Let them bet. It changes nothing about what I intend to do. Savannah. He rarely used her first name, and it caught her attention the way he clearly meant it to. Pride's a fine thing, but it doesn't pay debts, and it won't put grass back on land that hasn't seen rain in 3 months. She did not answer him, because she did not have an answer that did not sound like the same stubbornness he was gently, tiredly warning her against. He left her alone at the table, and later, alone in her room with the door shut and the lamp turned low. Savannah allowed herself the one luxury she never showed anyone else on the ranch. She cried, quietly, for her father, for the ranch he had trusted her to protect, for the impossible arithmetic of keeping a promise with numbers that refused, no matter how she arranged them, to add up in her favor. The next morning brought no rain and no relief, only the same dry wind moving through cracked earth, and the same red ledger waiting on the table. But it also carried, though Savannah could not have known it yet, the first quiet sign that her fortune was about to shift. She would not recognize it for what it was until 3 days later, when a stranger, with a canvas bag and a plain, steady voice, stopped at her gate and took off his hat before he had said a single word. For now, she only knew the ranch needed saving, the debt needed paying, and every man who had come offering to solve both had only ever wanted to solve them by owning her along with the land. She latched the front gate that night out of habit more than necessity, looked once more at her father's hat hanging by the window, and told herself, as she had told herself every night for 2 years, that she would find a way through this on her own if she had to. She did not yet know how close she was to learning that some promises are easier kept with someone standing beside you. Beau's first week at Hale Ranch passed in a kind of quiet Savannah was not used to. He rose before the sun, worked until well after it had gone down, and spoke only when he had something worth saying. He did not complain about the wages, which were smaller than they should have been for the work he put in. He did not ask questions about the ranch's troubles, though anyone with open eyes could see them written across every sagging fence post and half-empty grain store. Savannah watched him from a distance the way she might watch a new horse, before deciding whether to trust it near the children in town, careful, patient, unwilling to hand over her confidence too quickly. On the 3rd day, she found him repairing a fence post near the north pasture that had been broken for months, one none of her other hands had ever bothered to fix, always claiming there were more urgent jobs waiting. "You didn't have to do that today," she said, coming to stand beside him as he tested the post's new strength with both hands. "Fence doesn't fix itself waiting for the right day to come along," Beau answered, not looking up from his work. "Most men I hire do the least they can for the most they can get. I'm not most men." It was a simple thing to say, plain and unadorned, but something about the honesty of it settled low in her chest, in a way grander promises from grander men never had. She had heard beautiful speeches from Reeve and from Coleman, and none of them had meant as much to her as those 4 quiet words from a man with dust on his boots and calluses on his hands. That evening, she carried a plate of food out to the bunkhouse herself, telling herself it was only practical, that a hired man worked better on a full stomach, and there was no sense wasting good food while it was hot. Beau thanked her simply, and did not make more of the gesture than it was, which she found, to her own surprise, that she was grateful for. "Where are you from?" she asked, settling onto the porch step nearby, though she had told herself she would only stay a minute. "East of here mostly. Moved around some over the years." "That's not much of an answer. It's the truthful part of one," Beau said, and there was something careful in how he said it, like a man walking around a hole in the ground he did not want her stepping into by accident. "You're allowed your secrets," Savannah said after a moment, watching the last light fade over the hills. "Everyone on this ranch carries a few. Does that include you, Miss Hale?" "Especially me." He smiled then, the first real smile she had seen cross his face since he arrived, and it changed him entirely, softening the watchfulness that usually sat behind his eyes into something warmer, something she found herself wanting to see again. She looked away before he could notice that she had noticed. Cade did not share her growing ease with the newcomer. He watched Bo work through narrowed eyes over those first days, and one morning, while Savannah was inside settling accounts, he cornered the new hand near the stable, arms crossed. "You don't talk much," Cade said. "Didn't know talking was part of the job description," Bo replied evenly, not slowing his work. "Just wondering what a man like you is doing on a ranch like this. You don't carry yourself like a hired hand. Never have. Not from the first day. A man can carry himself however he pleases, and still know how to mend a fence, Cade." Cade said nothing more, but he watched Bo ride out to check the herd that afternoon, with the same suspicion he might have given a wolf that had wandered too close to the cattle pens. He had never trusted quiet men. In his experience, the quiet ones were usually hiding something loud enough to burn a place down, if given the chance. Savannah, for her part, was starting to notice something she had not allowed herself to notice in a long while, that she looked forward to the moments Bo was near, and that the ranch, for all its mounting troubles, felt a little less heavy on her shoulders when he was working beside her, instead of watching from a distance, the way the others often did. She told herself it was only relief at finally having a reliable hand again after months of being let down. She told herself that more than once over the following days, which should have told her something all on its own about how little she believed it. The accident started small enough that Savannah almost missed the pattern threading through them. A gate left open, letting 3 cattle wander toward the ridge overnight. A bag of feed spoiled by water that should never have gotten near it. A wagon wheel that cracked on a simple ride into town, though it had been sound and checked only the week before. "Bad luck comes in threes," said old Tam, one of the 2 remaining hands, when Savannah mentioned it at supper, trying to sound reassuring, though his eyes did not quite believe his own words. "This isn't luck," Bo said quietly. It was the first thing he had said during the whole meal, and the table quieted to hear it. Bad luck doesn't leave a gate latch undone, the same careless way 3 separate times. Savannah looked at him, setting down her fork. "You think someone's doing this on purpose? I think it's worth watching who's around when it happens, and who isn't." Cade, seated across the table, set his own fork down with more force than the moment called for. "Are you accusing someone? A new man?" "Not accusing," Bo said, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Just saying what I'd say if this ranch was mine to protect. Watch close. Write down who's where when trouble strikes." The table went quiet after that, the kind of heavy quiet that settles when everyone is thinking the same uncomfortable thought, and none of them wants to be the first to say it. Savannah changed the subject to the next day's chores, but that night, lying awake and listening to the wind, she found herself turning Bo's words over and over, unable to set them down. 2 nights later, she woke to the sound of the cattle stirring, restless in a way that meant something had spooked them badly. She grabbed her rifle and went out into the dark, and found Bo already there ahead of her, moving calm and steady among the frightened animals, speaking low words that seemed to settle them faster than anything she had ever managed on her own. "Someone was here," he said when he saw her approaching. "Tracks by the north fence, boot prints, gone before I could catch sight of a face." "Cade?" she asked, though the name tasted wrong, even as it left her mouth. "Didn't see who, just tracks, and a gate that opened itself the same way it opened before." Bo studied her carefully in the moonlight. "You trust him a great deal. I've trusted him for years, since before my father passed. Trust is a good thing to hold on to, right up until it stops fitting the facts standing in front of you," he said gently, not as an accusation, but as a kind of care she was not accustomed to receiving from anyone on this ranch. "Just keep your eyes open, same as I intend to." She nodded, and for a moment they stood together in the quiet dark, the cattle settling slowly around them, the stars spread wide and bright overhead. Savannah realized, with something close to surprise, that she felt safer standing there than she had felt in 2 long years of running the ranch alone, and the realization frightened her nearly as much as the trouble at the fence line had. "Thank you," she said softly, "for staying steady tonight. The others look to you now, whether they say so out loud or not. Steady is easy when there's something worth staying steady for, Bo answered, and though he did not look directly at her when he said it, Savannah understood exactly what, or who, he meant by it. The rains still had not come, but something in Savannah had begun to soften, despite the dry season pressing in around her. She found reasons to be near Bo that she did not examine too closely, asking his opinion on a horse she meant to sell, walking with him along the fence line to check for further damage, lingering after supper, long after the others had gone off to bed. One evening she found him standing near her mother's rose bed, looking at the yellow blooms with an expression she could not quite name, somewhere between longing and old grief. "My mother planted these," Savannah said, coming to stand beside him, before she passed. "She always said a ranch needed one thing growing on it that wasn't meant to be sold or eaten or worried over." "She sounds like she understood something most folks forget," Bo said. "What's that?" "That you can't run a place on profit alone. It needs something soft growing in it too, or it turns into nothing but dirt and debt." Savannah looked at him, surprised by how closely his words matched a thought she had never once said aloud to anyone, not even to Cade, in all their years of working side by side. "You sound like a man who's lost a place like this before." Bo was quiet for a long moment, his eyes still on the roses, the gold evening light catching the edge of his face. "Once, a long time ago, before I ever came west. Will you tell me about it? Someday, not yet." He turned to face her fully, and his eyes held the same steadiness she had noticed the very first day he stood waiting at her gate. Some things need the right moment to be spoken, or they come out wrong and do more damage than good. She wanted to press him further, the old, guarded part of her wanting to know exactly what she had let onto her land, but a newer, quieter part of her, one that had grown steadily over these past weeks without her fully noticing, was content, for once, to wait. "You're a strange man, Bo." "Strange how?" "Every man who's come courting this ranch wanted to tell me everything about himself inside the first hour. Most of it, things that weren't even true. You've been here almost a month and told me next to nothing, and somehow I trust you more than any of them ever earned." "Maybe trust isn't built on what a man says about himself," Bo said. "Maybe it's built on what he does when nobody's standing there asking him to do it." She thought of the fence he had fixed without being told, the cattle he had calmed in the pitch dark, the quiet, steady labor he gave every single day, without complaint or demand for more than his small wage. He was right. He had shown her more truth through silence than Reeve or Coleman had ever managed with all their fine, practiced words combined. Without quite deciding to, she reached out and touched his hand where it rested near the roses. He did not pull away, and for a long, suspended moment neither of them spoke, the evening settling gold and soft around them, like something out of a memory not yet made. "I should go check on supper," Savannah said finally, though she made no move at all to leave. "Should you?" Bo asked, a small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "In a minute," she said, and stayed exactly where she was. The cattle began falling sick on a Tuesday, 3 of them refusing to eat, their eyes dull, their steps slow and unsteady across the pasture. By Wednesday, old Tam found the water in the near trough smelled wrong, sharp and bitter underneath the surface, nothing like the clean creek water it should have carried. "Someone's poisoned the water," Bo said, kneeling by the trough, dipping 2 fingers in and rubbing them together before throwing them wide and wiping his hand carefully on his trousers. "Not from the creek itself. This came from somewhere upstream, added on purpose by someone who knew exactly what they were doing." Savannah felt her stomach turn cold. Who would do something so cruel? "Someone who wants you desperate enough to finally sell," Bo said, standing and looking out toward the ridge. "Reeve's name keeps coming to my mind, though I can't yet prove it. Reeve's cruel in his own way, but I don't think even he would poison an animal just to get what he wants. Maybe not him with his own hands, but men like him rarely dirty their own hands when they can pay someone else to do it for them." Bo wiped his fingers a second time, I'm going to ride into town, check the water office, see who's been asking questions about the creek's path upstream of your land. I'm coming with you. Might be safer if you... It's my ranch, Bo. My cattle. My water. I'm coming. And that's the end of the discussion. He did not argue further, recognizing something in her tone that would not bend no matter how he pushed against it. They rode into town together, and at the small water office, the clerk grew visibly nervous under Savannah's steady questions, his eyes darting toward the door, as though checking whether someone might walk in and catch him talking too freely. There's been papers filed, the clerk admitted finally, lowering his voice to little more than a whisper. Someone bought rights to redirect part of the creek upstream, filed under a company name, not a person's name, Silverton Development. Savannah had heard that name before, whispered in town alongside all the talk of the coming auction. That's the company trying to buy up half this valley. A man named Grayson runs the whole operation, the clerk said, and Judge Alton signed off on the water rights faster than any filing I've ever seen pass through this office in 15 years. Didn't even wait out the usual month of review. Outside, Savannah stood in the street, anger and fear tangled together tight in her chest. A corrupt judge and a company poisoning my water, just to force me out. This isn't bad luck anymore, Bo. This is a plan. No, Bo agreed, his voice low and certain. And plans have weak points, the same as any fence line does, if you know where to look. I'm going to find Grayson's weak point, Savannah. I give you my word on that. You keep saying things like a man who's fought this kind of fight before. Bo did not answer right away, and when he finally did, his voice had dropped even lower. I have, longer ago than I would ever wish on you. This time, though, I don't intend to lose it. Cade's mood had darkened steadily over the following weeks, and it came to a sharp head the morning Savannah asked Bo, instead of him, to lead the next cattle drive to the rail depot. I've led every drive on this ranch for 6 years running, Cade said, his voice tight with an anger he tried and failed to hide. Now you're handing it over to a man who's been here 2 months? Bo's earned the trust, Savannah said, meeting his eyes steadily. This isn't about years served, Cade. It's about who stays steady when trouble comes calling. And I haven't been steady in your eyes. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Cade turned and walked away before she could offer anything more, and Savannah felt a small, uneasy pull settle in her chest, the sense that something between them had cracked, in a way that would not mend easily, if it mended at all. The morning of the drive, 300 head of cattle moved slowly and dusty down the trail toward the rail depot, Bo riding at the front, Savannah alongside him, Cade bringing up the rear, with 2 other hands trailing behind. Halfway through, at the narrowest point of the trail where the land dropped steep on one side, the herd suddenly bolted, spooked by something none of them saw coming in time. "Stampede!" old Tam shouted, and the world dissolved into noise and choking dust, and the terrible thunder of hooves, moving faster than any of them could outrun on foot, or even on horseback. Savannah's horse reared hard, nearly throwing her from the saddle, and in the chaos, she saw Bo turn his own mount straight against the flow of the herd, riding directly into the danger instead of away from it, working with fierce precision to turn the lead cattle before the whole herd could drive itself, and everyone near it, straight over the steep drop. Later, once the herd had calmed, and the cattle counted 3 lost over the edge, the rest, thankfully saved, Bo found the source of the panic. A torn strip of red cloth, tied deliberately to a bush near the trail. Exactly the kind of thing that would spook cattle moving through a narrow pass. Exactly the kind of thing that did not tie itself there by simple accident. Somebody wanted this drive to fail, Bo said, holding up the cloth for the others to see. Cade rode up just then, his face pale beneath the dust. I should have been watching that stretch closer. That failure is on me. Or somebody wanted it to look that way, Bo said, watching him with careful, unreadable eyes. You think I did this? Cade's voice rose sharp and wounded. I've worked this land since before you ever knew it existed, and you rode in 2 months ago and questioned my loyalty to Savannah's family. Nobody's said your name, Cade. Savannah cut in quickly, though even as she said it, she noticed Bo had not once looked away from him. Let's get the herd safely to the depot. We'll sort the rest of this out later, once tempers have cooled. They finished the drive in tense, unbroken silence, and that night, back at the ranch, Savannah found herself unable to shake the memory of Bo's steady, unconvinced eyes on Cade, and the small, sick feeling that her old trust and her new one were on a collision course that would not end gently for either man involved. 2 nights after the stampede, riders came for the ranch itself, 3 men in the dark, faces covered, meaning to burn the feed barn and frighten Savannah into finally selling once and for all. Bo woke before any of the others, some instinct in him sharper than sleep, and by the time Savannah reached the yard with her rifle in hand, he was already moving through the shadows like a man who had done this kind of fighting many times before, in a life he had never fully described to her. She watched, breath caught tight in her throat, as Bo closed the distance on the nearest rider before the man could strike a match, disarming him with 2 quick, controlled movements that spoke of training no ordinary ranch hand would ever have needed to learn. The second rider swung a heavy club at Bo's head. Bo ducked under it smoothly and answered with a blow that put the man flat on the ground before he understood what had happened to him. The third rider, seeing his companions down and defeated, turned his horse hard and fled into the darkness without looking back. Savannah fired a warning shot into the night sky, and between her steady rifle and Bo's steady hands, the 2 remaining men were bound with rope and left for the sheriff to collect by morning light. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Savannah asked afterward, her hands still trembling faintly from the rush of it, watching Bo check the barn carefully for any sign of fire that might have caught it before they arrived. "Different life," Bo said. "One I never wanted to bring here to your door. It found you anyway, whether you wanted it or not." Seems it did. He looked at her then, and for the first time, something in his careful control slipped just slightly, enough that she saw genuine exhaustion and worry beneath the steadiness he usually wore like armor. "I should have told you more from the start, Savannah, about who I was before I ever walked up to your gate. Then tell me now, while we're standing here." He was quiet for a long moment, weighing something heavy behind his eyes. "My father made a mistake, a long time ago, one that hurt a family much like yours, badly and permanently. I came out here partly looking for a way to make it right, some small measure of it. I never expected to find someone worth fighting for in the middle of trying. That's still not telling me everything, Bo." "No," he admitted quietly, "but it's more true than anything I've said to you before now. Give me a little more time for the rest. I promise you it's coming, and soon, whether I feel ready for it or not." Savannah studied his face in the moonlight, torn between the old instinct urging her to demand the whole truth immediately, and the newer, steadier instinct telling her this man had already proven, in blood and bruises earned that very night, exactly where his loyalty stood, without needing to say another word. "All right," she said finally, letting out a slow breath. "Time, but not much more of it, Bo." "Fair enough," he said, and for the first time since the fight had ended, he allowed himself something like a real smile, tired but genuine, and Savannah found herself smiling back, despite everything the long, frightening night had cost them both. The bound men from the barn attack talked. Eventually, once the sheriff leaned on them hard enough, over several long days of questioning. They named no one directly, too frightened of their employer to give up a name outright, but one of them let slip a small detail that turned Savannah's stomach cold. They had known exactly which night to strike, because someone inside the ranch had told them when the hands would be spread thin, checking the north pasture. Only a handful of people had known that particular schedule. Savannah, Bo, old Tam, and Cade. She found the notebook first, tucked among Cade's belongings, while helping him search for a missing tally sheet, not the ranch's official ledger, but a small private notebook, filled with careful dates, exact numbers, and a name that made her hands go cold with dawning understanding. Grayson, Silverton Development, payment received. She confronted him that evening, the notebook open on the table between them, Bo standing quiet by the door, close enough to step in should he need to. "Explain this to me," Savannah said, her voice steadier than she felt inside. Cade's face moved through several expressions before finally settling on something like relief, the particular look of a man who no longer had to carry a secret entirely alone. "Grayson found me 2 years back, not long after your father died. I offered money I couldn't rightly refuse at the time, just to report small things about the ranch. Small at first, then it grew bigger and harder to stop. You poisoned the water," Savannah said flatly. "I let someone else in to do it. I told myself I never touched anything with my own 2 hands. His voice cracked on the words. "I told myself that made it somehow different from the rest." "It doesn't make it different at all," Savannah said. "You spooked the herd during the drive. You nearly got people killed on that trail. You told them exactly when to hit the barn." "I didn't know about the barn attack until it was already planned out," Cade said desperately. "I swear that to you, Savannah. I told them the schedule, because Grayson threatened to ruin what's left of my family's name in this whole town if I refused him. I know full well that's no excuse for what I did." "No," Savannah agreed quietly. "It isn't an excuse at all." She looked at the man she had trusted for years, who had worked beside her father through good seasons and bad, who she had once thought of as the closest thing to family left to her on this ranch, and felt something quiet and important break inside her chest. Not the sharp pain of losing a person, but the slower, sadder grief of losing trust itself. "Get off my land," she said. "Before I decide, the sheriff needs to hear every word of this from me instead." Cade left that same night, and Savannah stood on the porch long after his horse had disappeared down the road. The same porch where she had once watched Reeve ride away in anger, feeling a very different kind of loss this time. Not triumph, but the quiet ache of learning that betrayal often wears the most familiar face of all. Bo came to stand beside her, saying nothing at first, simply present in the steady way he always seemed to be when it mattered most. "I keep thinking I should have seen it sooner," Savannah said softly. "Trust isn't foolish, just because someone breaks it eventually," Bo said. "The foolish thing would be deciding never to trust anyone again, because of what one person did." She looked at him then, and understood he was not only speaking about Cade. The county land auction fell on a bright, cold morning, the kind of day that seemed almost too cheerful for what it carried inside it. Half the town gathered outside the courthouse steps, drawn by the promise of finally watching Hale Ranch change hands after 2 long years of relentless talk. Grayson stood near the front of the crowd, dressed sharp and confident. Judge Alton beside him, with the easy familiarity of men who had done this exact kind of business together many times before, without ever once being caught. Savannah stood near the back with Bo, old Tam, and the 2 hands who had stayed loyal through everything, her chin held high, despite the tightness gripping her chest. "The bank has called the note on Hale Ranch," the auctioneer announced loudly. "Bidding will open at the full amount owed." Grayson raised his hand almost before the words had finished leaving the auctioneer's mouth, naming a figure meant to end the bidding before it had properly begun. Low enough that no honest rancher in the crowd could ever hope to match it. High enough to satisfy the bank's demands on paper. "That's robbery in broad daylight," old Tam muttered under his breath. "That's the whole plan," Savannah said quietly. "Buy it low, since nobody in this town has the money to outbid him, and everybody standing here already knows it." Judge Alton moved to bring down his gavel, the sale all but finished before it had properly started, and Savannah felt the ground shift beneath her boots. 2 years of fighting about to end in a single practiced motion of a corrupt man's hand. "I'll match that bid," Bo said, stepping forward, his voice carrying clear and strong across the stunned crowd. "And I'll raise it by the full amount of the debt Silverton Development owes to the estate of Thomas Ashwood." The courthouse steps went utterly silent. Grayson's confident expression cracked for the very first time. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir." "I believe you do." Bo pulled a folded set of papers from inside his coat. The same canvas bag he had carried the day he first walked up to Savannah's gate, now nowhere in sight, replaced entirely by the bearing of a man no longer hiding who he truly was. My name is Beauregard Ashwood. 15 years ago, my father was swindled out of his own land by a man working for your company under a different name, using the very same trick you're attempting today. Manufactured debt, a friendly judge, and a low bid nobody could ever hope to match. I have spent 5 years quietly buying up every note tied to Silverton Development's dealings across 3 counties, including the note on this very ranch, purchased 3 full months before I ever walked through Miss Hale's gate, looking for honest work. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Savannah stared at him, the pieces of the quiet cowboy she had let onto her land, slowly rearranging themselves into someone far larger than she had ever let herself imagine. "This is absurd," Grayson said, though his voice had visibly lost its earlier confidence. "Judge Alton, surely you can—" "Judge Alton," Beau said, cutting him off cleanly, "signed water rights on Hale Ranch land in under a single week, against every normal process this county requires. The very same week Silverton's men poisoned that ranch's water supply. I have witnesses ready to testify. I have the filing dates in hand, and I have every legal right, as the primary creditor on this debt, to demand this auction be halted immediately, pending a full investigation." The judge's face had gone pale as chalk, and around them the crowd had begun to murmur loudly, the kind of low, dangerous murmur that told Savannah the town's sympathy, silent and cautious for 2 long years, was finally tipping firmly in her favor. "The auction's closed," the sheriff said, stepping forward from the crowd, his hand resting meaningfully on his belt. "Until this whole matter gets sorted out properly. By the book." Grayson turned and walked stiffly to his waiting carriage without another word, and Judge Alton followed shortly after, his authority crumbling visibly with every single step he took away from the courthouse. Savannah stood frozen on the steps, watching the man who had just saved her ranch stand taller than she had ever seen him allow himself to stand before, and understood, all at once, that the quiet cowboy had only ever been half of the whole truth. The investigation into Silverton Development and Judge Alton moved quickly once it finally started, the way things often do when the truth has been waiting a long time for someone brave enough to say it out loud in front of witnesses. Grayson's operation collapsed within the month, and several of his other questionable land deals across the valley were unwound and returned to their rightful, original owners. Judge Alton was removed from his post entirely, and a new judge, appointed from the next county over, arrived promising to review every questionable filing made across the past 5 years. Hale Ranch stood safe at last, its crushing debt cleared, its water rights fully restored, its future no longer hanging on a stranger's cruelty or a corrupt man's careless gavel. Savannah found Beau by the rosebed that evening, the very same place he had once stood, and told her that some things needed the right moment to be spoken aloud. The sun was setting gold over the valley, the same warm color as the roses her mother had planted so many years before, and for a long moment neither of them said a single word. "You could have told me from the very start," Savannah said finally, "who you truly were, what you were really doing here on my land. I thought about it every single day," Beau admitted honestly, "but the truth was heavy, Savannah, and I didn't want you to see me as my father's mistake before you ever had the chance to see me simply as myself, apart from all of that history." "And who is that, exactly?" "Beauregard Ashwood, or the quiet cowboy who fixed my broken fences without being asked." "Both, I sincerely hope. I would like to be both, if you'll still have me after everything." Savannah studied him carefully, this man who had walked onto her land with nothing but a canvas bag and a plan, 5 long years in the making, who had fought off armed men in the pitch dark and stood tall against a corrupt judge in broad daylight, who had never once, in all those difficult months, asked her for anything beyond the simple chance to work honestly beside her. "My father used to say a ranch needed something soft growing on it, or it would turn into nothing but dirt and debt," she said softly. I think he would have liked you, Bo, even knowing your real name. I would have liked very much to meet him, Bo said quietly. I'm sorry I only ever got to see what he left behind. He left behind far more than just a ranch, Savannah said, stepping closer to him. He left behind someone who learned, the hard way, that being strong doesn't have to mean being entirely alone. I spent 2 years believing I had to carry everything myself, and it took a quiet stranger showing up at my gate to teach me otherwise, patiently, without ever once demanding I change. You were never weak for wanting help, Savannah. You were only ever waiting for someone worth trusting enough to finally accept it from. She reached for his hand among the roses, the same way she had weeks before, and this time he laced his fingers through hers, without any hesitation at all. Stay, she said simply. Not as a hired hand, not as a secret kept from the town, just as yourself, exactly as you are. I'll stay, Bo said, for as long as you'll have me standing beside you, and I have a strong feeling that might turn out to be a very long time indeed. The following spring, the rains finally returned to the valley, filling the creek back to its old banks, and turning the pasture a deep, healthy green for the first time in 2 long years. Hale Ranch thrived under 2 names now instead of 1, and in town, people had stopped whispering about the auction and started whispering instead about the small, simple wedding held beneath the rose bed, exactly the quiet way Savannah had always wanted it to be. Cade never returned to the valley, though word reached Savannah once, through a letter forwarded from a neighboring county, that he had found honest work on a smaller ranch and was trying, slowly and carefully, to build something better than the mistake that had cost him his place at Hale Ranch. Savannah read the letter once, and did not answer it, but she did not burn it either. Some doors, she had learned over that long, hard year, were better left unlocked than slammed permanently shut forever. Savannah often thought back on the lesson her father's ranch had taught her across the hardest 2 years of her life, that independence and partnership were never truly opposites, that asking for help was not the same thing as admitting defeat, and that the people most worth trusting rarely announced themselves loudly at the front gate. They showed up quietly instead, did the difficult work nobody else wanted to do, and let their steady actions speak long before their words ever caught up to match them. She thought, too, about all the offers she had almost lost the ranch to accepting, about Reeve and Coleman, and every man who had ever tried to buy her future instead of patiently earning it, and how she had learned, the hard way, that real security never came from a man's wallet or his fine promises, but from honesty, patience, and a genuine willingness to build something together, brick by brick, fence post by fence post, season after difficult season. On quiet evenings, she and Bo still walked together among her mother's roses, and sometimes she caught him watching the valley the way he had that very first day, careful and steady, as though he still could not quite believe he had finally found a place where he truly belonged. "What would you change if you could go back?" she asked him once, watching the sun sink slowly behind the ridge. "Only the day I finally knocked on your gate. I'd have come sooner," he said, and she laughed, and the warm sound of it carried over the ranch that had, against every hard year and every corrupt man who had tried to take it from her, finally learned how to be at peace.